You know the feeling when you walk into your own house, the place you pay a mortgage on, the place where you're supposed to feel like the king of your castle, and instead you feel a sudden, crushing weight in your chest because you spot something on the kitchen counter? It wasn't a bill, and it wasn't a flyer for pizza coupons. It was an envelope. A cream-colored, textured, heavy cardstock envelope that looked like it cost more than my first car, stamped with the embossed gold foil logo of the Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. It sat there on the granite like an unexploded ordnance, radiating that specific kind of passive-aggressive energy that only a suburban board of directors can generate. My wife, Sarah, was already in the kitchen, chopping carrots with a little more force than necessary, and she didn't even look up when I walked in because she knew. She could sense the shift in the atmospheric pressure. She just said, "Don't open it, Mark. Just drink a beer, watch the game, and we'll deal with it in the morning." But she knew that was impossible. She knew I couldn't just let it sit there, because that envelope was a challenge. It was a gauntlet thrown down on my laminate flooring. I picked it up, and it felt dense, like it was packed with disappointment. I ripped it open, bypassing the letter opener because I was already past the point of civility, and I pulled out the single sheet of paper that would effectively ruin my month. Violation Notice 704B. Unauthorized acquisition of exotic fauna. I remember staring at the words, the Times New Roman font mocking me, as I read the paragraph explaining that my plans to get a blue-tongued skink for my 8-year-old daughter, Maya, had been flagged by the Community Standards Committee. A skink, folks. A slow-moving, sausage-shaped lizard that eats blueberries and naps for 18 hours a day. But according to Mrs. Beatrice Vance, the president of the HOA and a woman who I am convinced sleeps hanging upside down like a bat, this lizard was classified as dangerous wildlife, lumped into the same category as Bengal tigers and king cobras. I told Maya that night. I sat on the edge of her bed, under her glow-in-the-dark stars, and I watched the light go out of her eyes when I explained that the habitat we'd built, the little heat lamp and the perfectly arranged rocks, had to go. She didn't throw a tantrum, which actually made it worse. She just pulled her knees up to her chest and cried these quiet, heartbreaking tears, asking why Mrs. Vance hated her. And that was it. That was the moment the switch flipped in my brain. If Beatrice had fined me for leaving my trash cans out too long, I would have grumbled and paid it. If she had complained about my grass being a quarter-inch too high, I would have mowed it. But she made my daughter cry, and she did it with bad science and a power trip. I waited until Sarah went to sleep, and then I went to the garage, dug through the filing cabinet where we keep the tax returns and the warranties for appliances we don't own anymore, and I found it. The Covenant. The 3-inch thick binder of rules and regulations for Silver Creek Estates. I poured a pot of coffee, black, and I sat at the kitchen table under the hum of the refrigerator, reading. I read through the night. I read about mailbox uniformity. I read about the acceptable shades of beige for exterior trim. There were 12, by the way. I read about the prohibition of musical wind chimes versus the allowance of percussive bamboo chimes. And then, around 3 a.m., with my eyes burning and my soul withering, I found it. Article 14, Section C. Prohibited animals. It listed everything. Snakes, lizards, swine, cattle, horses, primates. But then, I saw the asterisk. It led to a footnote, which led to an exemption clause in the addendum from 1998, back when this neighborhood was built on old farmland. It said, residents are permitted to keep and maintain standard domestic fowl for the purpose of household sustenance or companionship, provided they are not used for commercial farming operations. I read it again. Standard, domestic, fowl. I felt a smile spread across my face that was probably terrifying to behold. I wasn't getting a lizard. Oh no, a lizard hides in a tank. A lizard is quiet. A lizard doesn't make a statement. I woke Sarah up, which was a tactical error, but I was vibrating with adrenaline. I told her we were getting chickens. She looked at me like I was having a stroke and told me to go to sleep, but the next morning, I didn't go to the pet store. I drove 2 hours out into the sticks, past the suburbs, past the outlet malls, until the roads turned to gravel, and I pulled up to a place called Grady's Feed and Seed. The place smelled like wet hay and biological destiny. Old Man Grady was sitting on the porch, whittling something that looked suspiciously like a shiv, and he looked at my polo shirt and my clean SUV with a mixture of pity and amusement. I walked up to him, and I didn't ask for laying hens. I didn't ask for the nice, quiet Rhode Island Reds that just peck around and make breakfast. I told him I needed birds that had personality. I told him I needed birds that looked like they were designed by a Jim Henson puppet maker who had a really bad fever dream. Grady just spat on the ground and said, "You looking for eggs, son, or are you looking for trouble?" I told him I was looking for justice. We walked out of there with 6 boxes. I bought 2 Polish crested hens, birds that have a giant poof of feathers on their heads so they can't see anything, which means they panic at the slightest noise and scream. I bought 2 frizzles, which look like a feather duster that got stuck in a light socket. Their feathers curl backward, making them look perpetually surprised and disheveled. And then, for the piece de resistance, I bought Vader. Vader was a Jersey giant rooster. Now, the bylaws didn't say no roosters. They just said fowl. Vader was black as midnight, stood about 2 feet tall, and had a crow that sounded like a foghorn mourning the dead. Bringing them home was like smuggling uranium. I pulled the car into the garage, shut the door, and let them out into the backyard. It was instant chaos. The Polish hens ran into the fence because they couldn't see. The frizzles started scratching up the perfectly manicured sod, and Vader hopped up onto the patio furniture and let out a sound that shook the windows. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I didn't just dump them there, though. I knew Beatrice. I knew she would be on me like a hawk on a field mouse. So I went to the HOA portal, that clunky website that hasn't been updated since the dial-up era, and I registered them. Under Pet Type, I selected Other. Under Breed, I typed in North American Heritage Breakfast Hounds. I uploaded a blurry photo of one of the frizzles that looked vaguely like a small, angry poodle, and I hit Submit. The system, designed to auto-approve anything that wasn't a pit bull, sent me a green checkmark. Registration pending approval, provisional status granted. That was all I needed. I hired a guy named Big Mike to build the coop. Big Mike was a contractor who drove a truck held together by duct tape and hatred for authority. I told him I needed a coop that was technically a temporary structure, so no permit needed, but built like a bunker. We painted it taupe mist, the exact color of my house. We put shingle siding on it. We installed solar-powered motion lights. By the time we were done, it didn't look like a chicken coop. It looked like a guest house for a very small, very eccentric relative. The first confrontation happened 3 days later. I was in the yard, watching Vader terrorize a squirrel, when I felt the shadow. I looked up, and there she was. Beatrice Vance. She was standing on the other side of the white picket fence, wearing a visor and holding a clipboard, her knuckles white as she gripped a pen. She looked at the coop. She looked at the frizzles, who were currently digging a hole to the center of the earth in the middle of my flower bed. She looked at me. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice trembling with a frequency that could shatter crystal. "What are those?" "Afternoon, Beatrice," I said, leaning on a rake like I was a farmer in a painting. "Those are my companion animals. Domestic fowl. Heritage breed. Very rare. They are livestock," she hissed. "You have brought barnyard animals into a covenant-restricted community. I will have you fined into bankruptcy. I will have that structure torn down and turned into toothpicks." "Actually," I said, pulling the laminated copy of the bylaws out of my back pocket. "Yes, I laminated it. Article 14, Section C, Standard Domestic Fowl. And if you look at the portal, you'll see they are provisionally registered as therapeutic pets. The big black one, that's Vader. He's my emotional support animal. He helps me deal with stress. Mostly the stress caused by invasive neighbors." Beatrice turned a color I've never seen on a human face before, a sort of violent plum. She didn't say another word. She just spun on her heel and marched back to her house, her orthopedic shoes squeaking on the pavement. I knew I hadn't won the war. I had just won the opening skirmish. The real bombardment began the next week. First came the noise complaints. "Sustained auditory nuisance," the letter said. "Fine, $200. I responded by lining the entire inside of the coop with acoustic recording studio foam. When the chickens screamed inside, it sounded like a muted television in the next room. Then came the sanitation hazard fine, claiming the smell was drifting. I bought industrial-grade pine pellets and started raking that run twice a day. It smelled cleaner than her kitchen. But the real escalation, the moment things went from a legal dispute to a neighborhood spectacle, was when I started walking them. Beatrice walked her prize-winning poodle, Precious, every evening at 6 p.m. Precious was a nervous little dog that wore rhinestone collars. So, I went online and bought chicken harnesses. Yes, they exist. I strapped a red harness onto Phyllis, the frizzle with the craziest feathers, attached a leash, and waited. At 6:05 p.m., as Beatrice was strutting past my house, nose in the air, I walked out. "Come along, Phyllis," I said loudly. "Heel." Phyllis did not heel. Phyllis did a weird, jerky waddle, pecking at the pavement, but she moved forward. I fell in step about 10 feet behind Beatrice. When Precious stopped to sniff a hydrant, Phyllis stopped to peck a bug. When Beatrice sped up, I jogged to keep pace. It was psychological warfare of the highest order. The neighbors started coming out onto their porches. People were taking videos. Mr. Henderson from down the street, a guy who hadn't smiled since the Reagan administration, gave me a thumbs up. Beatrice couldn't say anything because I was on a public sidewalk, cleaning up after my pet with a little baggie, just like the rules stated. She ended up sprinting the last block just to get away from us. But Beatrice wasn't done. She was a tactician. If she couldn't get me on the existing rules, she would change them. 2 weeks later, the notices went up. Emergency Town Hall Meeting. Agenda Item 1. Amendment to Article 14. Total prohibition of poultry and avian livestock. She was going to rewrite the constitution of the neighborhood just to crush me. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Usually, these meetings are just me, Beatrice, and 3 people complaining about the pool temperature. But tonight, it was standing room only. People were hanging off the basketball hoops. They weren't there for the budget. They were there for the drama. They wanted to see the Chicken Man versus the Iron Lady. Beatrice took the podium first. She had a PowerPoint presentation. She showed blurry photos of my coop. She played a recording of Vader crowing that she had clearly amplified to sound like a T-Rex. She gave a speech about sanctity, about property values, about the slippery slope toward living in a shanty town. She was good, I'll give her that. She played on their fear. "Do you want to wake up to the smell of manure?" she asked. "Do you want feathers in your pools?" Then, it was my turn. I stood up. I didn't go to the mic immediately. I walked over to the table where the 5 board members were sitting, Beatrice's loyalists. I was carrying a large, insulated picnic basket. I placed it on the table and opened the lid. The smell hit the room instantly. It wasn't manure. It was butter. It was cheese. It was warm, flaky pastry. "I know it's late," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. "And I know we're all tense. But before I defend my girls, I wanted to offer a peace offering. This is a quiche Lorraine. Spinach, Gruyere cheese, caramelized onions, and eggs laid this morning by the very defendants on trial today." I saw the treasurer, a guy named Bob who looked like he hadn't eaten a carb in a decade, twitch. His nostrils flared. "It's still warm," I whispered. I cut a slice and put it on a paper plate. I slid it to Bob. He looked at Beatrice, then he looked at the quiche. The quiche won. He took a bite. The room went silent. Bob chewed. He closed his eyes. A look of transcendent joy washed over his face. "Oh my God," Bob muttered into the hot mic, "that's creamy." I turned to the crowd. "Neighbors," I said, "Mrs. Vance talks about property values. But what is a home? Is it just a box that looks exactly like the box next to it? Or is it a place where you can have a little freedom? A place where you can have breakfast that doesn't taste like styrofoam? My chickens eat ticks. They eat spiders. They provide food. And yes, they're a little weird looking. But aren't we all?" I heard a few chuckles. I had them. But I knew Beatrice. She wouldn't go down because of a quiche. She grabbed the mic back. "This is bribery," she shrieked. "He is bribing the board with cholesterol. This is irrelevant. The vote will proceed." "One more thing," I interrupted, cutting her off. "If we're going to talk about strictly enforcing the rules to protect the neighborhood's ecosystem, as Mrs. Vance insisted in her opening statement, I think we need to look at the whole picture." I signaled to Big Mike, who was standing by the projector. He hit a button. The screen changed. It wasn't a picture of chickens. It was a picture of Beatrice's front yard. Specifically, the massive, sprawling, beautiful hedge that lined her driveway. "That," I said, pointing a laser pointer at the screen, "is Japanese knotweed. Rhianutria japonica." Beatrice froze. She stopped breathing. "I brought an expert," I said. I pointed to the back of the room where a guy in a plaid shirt stood up. It was Dr. Eris, a botanist from the local university who I had paid in fresh eggs and a bottle of bourbon. "Doctor, that is indeed knotweed," Dr. Eris said, adjusting his glasses. It is classified as a Class A invasive species by the state. It's illegal to plant, illegal to sell, and illegal to transport. Its roots can penetrate concrete foundations and destroy septic systems. According to your own HOA bylaws, Article 9, Section D, the presence of a Class A invasive requires immediate professional remediation. I turned back to Beatrice. I looked up the remediation costs. Beatrice, you can't just cut it. You have to excavate the soil to a depth of 10 feet. It has to be hauled away in hazardous waste trucks. The estimated cost for a hedge that size is approximately $40,000. And, per the bylaws, you are subject to a daily fine of $500 until it is gone. The room erupted. It was pandemonium. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The woman who measured grass with a ruler was harboring a botanical fugitive that could eat our houses. Bob, with crumbs of quiche still on his lip, leaned into his microphone. I moved to dismiss the amendment regarding poultry, he shouted over the noise. And I moved to open an inquiry into the landscaping violations at 104 Oak Street. Seconded, yelled Mr. Henderson from the back. All in favor. The aye that roared through that gymnasium shook the dust off the rafters. Beatrice Vance stood there, small and defeated, watching her empire crumble over a plate of eggs and a weed. She didn't look at me. She just looked at the screen, at the picture of her beloved hedge, realizing that she had been hoisted by her own petard. 2 weeks later, the neighborhood was quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the oppressive silence of fear. It was the peaceful silence of a ceasefire. Beatrice had resigned from the board citing health reasons, though everyone knew it was because the excavators were currently tearing up her front lawn, turning her prize-winning garden into a muddy crater to get the knotweed roots out. I was sitting on my back porch, rocking in a chair, watching the sun go down. The sky was painting itself in shades of purple and orange, colors that were definitely not HOA approved, but nature didn't care. Maya was in the yard, sitting in the grass, feeding a piece of kale to Phyllis. She was laughing. That was the only sound that mattered. Hey, Mark. I looked up. It was Mr. Henderson. He was walking up my driveway holding a 6-pack of craft beer. Trade? He asked, holding up the beer. What are you looking for, Bill? I'm making a cake for my wife's birthday. I need 4 eggs. The good ones. I reached into the cooler I now kept permanently on the porch. I grabbed a carton. Deal. He swapped the beer for the eggs and looked out at the yard. Vader was strutting along the fence line, looking like a general inspecting his troops. He stopped, looked at Bill, and let out a soft, guttural cluck. You know, Bill said, cracking a beer and handing it to me. I thought you were crazy. I thought we were going to have a shantytown here. But it's kinda nice. Feels a little less like a prison camp and a little more like a home. That was the plan, Bill, I said, taking a sip. That was the plan. Sarah walked out, drying her hands on a dish towel. She sat on the arm of my chair and rested her head on my shoulder. You know they want you to run for president next term, right? She whispered. I laughed. Me? The anarchist? The chicken man. They like the eggs, Mark. And they like that you stood up to her. Bob says he's lost 5 pounds since he started eating your omelets. I looked out at the fortress. The solar lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the yard. My girls were roosting, safe and sound. The breakfast hounds, the agents of chaos that had brought down a tyrant. I think I'll pass on the presidency, I said. I've got enough work to do. Oh yeah. Sarah smiled. Like what? Like expanding the operation, I grinned. I was reading the bylaws again last night. Did you know there's absolutely no specific prohibition on pygmy goats as long as they're for landscape maintenance? Sarah groaned and slapped my arm, but she was laughing. So tell me, was I the hero here? Was I the guy who stood up for the little man, for the right to have a lizard, for the right to use his own backyard? Or was I just another neighbor from hell who weaponized the rulebook to destroy an old lady's garden? Honestly, when I look at Maya playing with those birds, and I taste that fresh quiche, I don't really care about the answer. In the suburbs, you either die a hero, or you live long enough to become the guy with the chickens. But I want to know what you think. Have you ever had a war with your HOA? Did you win, or did they crush you? Drop a comment below, let's hear your war stories. And if you're ever in Silver Creek, stop by. I'll trade you a dozen eggs for a decent beer. Just don't tell the new president about the goats. Not yet.